Okay, you'll see from the screen behind me that we're running through the third series of the Way Up course, and this one is entitled Investigations. There's a lot of archaeology and some evidence and some stuff all the way through. As I said last week, I'm really looking for factual material, things that are concrete. You can actually say to somebody, I've only seen the photo of it, but people have been there and done that. And this particular theme that we're doing tonight, you'll see there we've done 4. We did those before the pandemic. Noah's Ark, Tower of Babel, Sodom and Gomorrah, Joseph in Egypt, all of those we covered. And then 18 months ago, the pandemic came and shut us down. So we're back up again. And this evening we're into... last week we did the Exodus, Moses and the Exodus, and tonight we're looking at Mount Sinai. Those two are two halves of one story, really. Originally, I did attempt to put those all into one talk, but as you can imagine, it got so long, it became unwieldy. So in this Way Up course, we're doing them as 2 separate talks, but I will try and recap a bit. Mainly because, last week was an awful lot of material, and I'm going to try and just summarize the essence of what we came out of that. We were talking about Moses, and we focused on Moses, you'll remember, the man that God raised up for this time. We looked also at Midian, at the land of Midian, and the significance of it, and where it is, and so on. And then we looked at the plagues, and what happened in Egypt when the plagues were released there, and then some actual physical remains of the horses and chariots that have been discovered now in what I believe is the crossing site of the Red Sea. So if I go through those, Moses, first of all, the Bible says it, and evidence confirms it. Josephus, the historian, also confirmed it, that Moses was adopted into the house of Pharaoh. So he really did become royal, at least in some sense. They think they've run to ground the princess that adopted him. She would probably have been Princess Nephuri, who became Queen Hatshepsut. She's one of the most significant female monarchs in the Egyptian royal house. I think Cleopatra possibly is a bit more well known, but even so, Hatshepsut is pretty much up there. Hatshepsut was a part of the 18th dynasty, and the focus of Moses coming into Egypt is in the 18th dynasty, the family line, and we did a whole lot of that. So if you weren't able to see that last week, it's now online and you can do. We have insights to suggest that Moses rose to a position of some influence, as you'd expect that he would do, in the Egyptian hierarchy. He was an architect. He was responsible for a number of amazing buildings in Egypt, and we looked at a great mausoleum where the 18th dynasty rulers were housed, and also a general. He was a general of brilliant ingenuity and bravery and impact, and won several battles during this time. So none of that's in the Bible, though it could easily be inferred. He was obviously a significant man. He also became a prince, and it's thought that he probably took the name Tutmosis. He was Tutmosis II, who didn't actually ever do anything. Tutmosis I we know, Tutmosis III we know, Tutmosis II is missing. And it's thought that's almost certainly because Moses fled before he could enter fully into his royal position. So Moses was a significant man in the Egyptian royal household. As we also said, he didn't sit easy with him. He was, you get that in the Bible. He was not altogether popular. He was a foreigner. He became divided in his loyalties and confused in his sense of identity of who he was. And so it's not surprising that after the murder of the guard, he fled to the land of Midian. And there it is. There's the map of it. You'll see that map quite a bit. That's a really good satellite image. And you'll see there the traditional Sinai, the place where everybody thinks Sinai is on the Sinai Peninsula that was named after Mount Sinai, but it's actually not there. The Bible says that Mount Sinai is in Midian. Midian is in Saudi Arabia, pretty much where that circle is down there. You'll see in the bottom right-hand corner of the map. And of course it was to there that God was going to take the children of Israel. So the direction that he was taking them was pretty crucial. If you look for evidence for Israel in another place, you're not going to find any because they didn't go there. The plagues are not mentioned much, but there was one document, a piece of papyrus that looks a bit threadbare, as you can see, but really mentions the plagues and the impact of them upon Egypt. I'm not going to go through the whole of it, but I mean, you see lots of echoes really of the plagues that the Bible mentions. The river is blood, there's death everywhere, there's pestilence throughout the land, there's hail and fire mixed with hail. They talk about it running along the ground. So there was really some pretty dramatic weather patterns. The land is deprived of kingship. So they're obviously going through a fairly major social upheaval, and there is death everywhere. So that's the papyrus of Ep6. Again, if you want it fully, look for last week. And the fourth thing that we tried to draw out were the remains. That's a chariot wheel, a four-spoke chariot wheel on the floor of the Red Sea, on the seabed there, and there are numbers of these things there. But it's in the Gulf of Aqaba, not in the Gulf of Suez. The Gulf of Suez, of course, was where most people looked for the children of Israel crossing into the wilderness. They actually started at the Gulf of Suez. They went across the Sinai Peninsula, as it's now called, and across the Gulf of Aqaba, the right-hand side of the Red Sea. I also found there a land bridge. Although the Gulf of Aqaba is 5,000 feet deep for pretty much its entire length, it's part of the African Rift Valley. It's really a deep chasm in the earth. There is actually one part of it where there is a land bridge that runs across. There are various thoughts as to how that might have been there. But anyway, land bridge there, and it's on that all are strewn all the remains and the bits and pieces, the chariot wheels, and there are a number of them, and we showed them last week. Horse and human skeletal parts. Some of them have become mineralized and petrified. Some are covered in coral, and so it's all jumbled up. And as we said last week, it'd be very difficult to disturb them because, of course, they're very fragile and they're more than likely to all fall to pieces if they do. So these photographs, they may not, they may be unrepeatable in the coming years. I wouldn't be surprised. It's the signs of Pharaoh and his army that were annihilated when God brought the waters back over the Red Sea. And as we said, Pharaoh was so hell-bent on pursuing the Israelites, if God had not acted in fairly critical judgment here, the Egyptian army would probably never have given up and would have continued to pursue Israel even into Midian and beyond. So Pharaoh and his army were annihilated, and God judged Egypt and all of that we looked at last week. Certainly the position of this confirms that the destination they were going to was Midian. This is a bit of the route of the Exodus that we talked about. The Bible talks about them, God leading the people on the ancient road that goes through the wilderness. And that ancient road is in green there. It runs along the top of the Sinai, which is the wilderness of the Red Sea. That's probably a better name for that wilderness. And that would have been the way that Moses would have gone when he came from Midian and went to Egypt, and God told him to lead the people down that road. It was a well-marked road. It was a road that went along there and then up north to Mesopotamia. The two great centers of population and civilization in the ancient world, Egypt, Mesopotamia, this was the major route. It was like the M1 that connected them. So they set off across that road. But at a certain point, as we see there in the purple, God said to Moses that he should turn off and go into the mountains. And Pharaoh said, oh goody, they're lost. You know, he thought this is a big mistake. They've gone into the mountains and there's no way out. It's a dead end. They're stuck in the journey that they've gone. But of course, we now know that God knew exactly what he was doing. They came to a beach at a place called Nuweiba that you can still go to today. And there, before the beach, they were faced with the army of Pharaoh thundering down upon them with chariots. God intervened, stopped them, while the waters then pulled back and they went into the sea, and that's where all the remains. And Pharaoh, of course, followed them, and the chariots came off his things, and they got bogged down and then buried and into Sinai. So, okay, so this is tonight. That was last week, but we're going to run through, don't worry, we're okay. I thought I'd put that up there because it gives a sense of the size of the Arabian desert. Now, you know, somebody said to me last week, but I mean, I was in Sinai, and the Sinai desert is just enormous. It's endless sand. But if you think Sinai desert, which is that little, I don't know whether you can see that there, that little bit there, that's the desert of Sinai. This is the Saudi Arabian desert, and that is the rough spot where Mount Sinai is. So they were right on the edge of a massive desert. And you think, well, where did the children of Israel roam for 40 years of wandering before they went into the promised land? You know, we couldn't have hardly gone round and round the wilderness of Sinai. They actually went into Saudi Arabia. And interestingly, there are records of some of the names of places in Saudi Arabia that are actually Hebrew origin. So there are records of the fact that the Hebrews were in Saudi Arabia and probably roamed all around this whole area, which I only came across recently when I read this book by Jim and Benny Caldwell. This one, if you want to buy this one, this is called The God of the Mountain. It's a lot cheaper than the one that I mentioned last week, as far as I know, and I got this quite reasonably. It reads like a novel, and it's the story of these two really ordinary people. I mean, he was working for a Saudi oil company as an engineer, and he was really what you call a basic bloke. He was not given to, you know, revelations and spiritual vision. She was the more spiritual one, which you often find actually. The wife is the more spiritual one. The bloke is the one who's a bit more pedantic and got his feet on the ground and that kind of thing. I'm probably generalizing, but that does tend to happen quite a lot. And he was the guy, and yet he was the one, he had a revelation. He had, God said to him, I want you to go and find the Ark of the Covenant. Now you may think, what's he talking about the Ark of the Covenant for? We're not on that. That's next week. But it's very interesting. I find it very interesting. There are echoes of God moving by the Spirit through these times. And he said, well, we've got to go and find the Ark of the Covenant. And he was excited. He was spiritually energized. His whole life came alive. And they decided that as soon as he got a break from the working in the oil refinery, they would go off and see if they could find the Ark of the Covenant. I thought, well, where will we go? Well, we'll go to Mount Sinai. I mean, actually, his Bible knowledge was not all that good, and he was completely following a red herring, and he'd never find it at Mount Sinai anyway, because it went with the children of Israel to the Promised Land. But that's what they thought. I find it really interesting. And so they headed for the old Mount Sinai, the one up there. In the middle, because they thought, well, where else would we find the Ark of the Covenant? We'll find it there. So they went to the old Mount Sinai, and they didn't find anything. They didn't find any sign of God. None of the signs that they saw. Certainly didn't find the Ark of the Covenant. There was nothing there in this place that they'd gone to. So they thought, well, where do we go? On their way back from that, they bumped into another guy called Ron Wyatt, who just recently been exploring in Saudi Arabia, and he said, I can tell you, you won't find anything in that Mount Sinai. That's not the real Mount Sinai. You've got to go, the real Mount Sinai is in Midian. And he drew them a map and a drawing, and they went then to Midian to search it out. And interestingly enough, Jim Jim and Penny, I only found this out recently, have got a massive photo archive of this whole area. Because he worked in Saudi Arabia, it was much easier for him to get access to it. And so they actually found it, and the book, it tells the story. It's quite, I mean, you hear a lot about them drinking coffee. They seem to practically live on coffee. But in amongst those kind of basic human things, you get a fascinating story of their adventure. So if you like a bit of an adventure, that's quite a good book to get. The God of the Mountain. So they are the ones, and they supplied these photos for other researchers, for people like Ron Wyatt and others that had also been there but hadn't been able to get the photographs. He'd been imprisoned while he was in Saudi Arabia and had his camera confiscated. So, you know, it was not easy to get in there. It's getting easier now, ironically. So anyway, as I say, they were looking for the Ark of the Covenant, never did find it. What they did find, however, among other things, that was unique to them, they found loads of what you call footprints in the desert. I mean, there's a reading in Deuteronomy 11, verse 24. Every place where you set your foot will be yours. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon and from the Euphrates River to the western sea. Every place where you put your footsteps will be yours. And he said, as they went through Saudi Arabia, everywhere they went, they found these, what I suppose you call them, petroglyphs, scratched out pictures on rocks of people's sandaled feet. I mean, that's the only one that I could get. I mean, it's not brilliant, but have you got that there? You see, it's a sandal like a flip-flop. Who would have thought that the Hebrews wore flip-flops all those years ago? And that probably are the straps on the sides there to tie them on. And everywhere you go, so these are not accident things, they're everywhere. So of course, they've come to the conclusion that the Jews were trying to, the Hebrews as they were then, were trying to establish their ownership of the places where they'd been and leave a record that their feet had been there. And God had said that you have it. Well, what comes out of that, I don't know. It'd be really interesting if the Saudis find that actually the Hebrews own Saudi Arabia after all. Anyway, we won't go down that road, but it's very funny. So that was Jim and Penny Caldwell and the background of it. So they didn't just wander in a little area. They wandered in this massive area, up and down and round, and left villages and all sorts of memories and names as a result of it. Right, okay, and now I've got to tonight's one, which is Mount Sinai. That's Mount Sinai, you'll see just behind the name there in the distance, but we'll get a better picture of that in a moment. There are two main points for tonight. First one is into the desert. We're going to follow them through the desert as far as the Bible gives us any kind of content and record and see if we can find the way that they went. So we're going to look at them at Marah, the place where the water was bitter. We're going to follow them at Elim, where there were palm trees and wells. Of course, there's a whole denomination named after Elim. We're going to follow them to Rephidim. Rephidim, they were there quite a long time. It was round the back of Mount Sinai, Mount of Horeb. And we're going to look at the rock at Horeb, and we're going to look at the battle with the Amalekites. All of this is recorded for us in the book of Exodus. And then we think we found Jethro's village. You remember Jethro lived in Midian, so there must have been some kind of oasis, some sort of water where they could live, where there could be a viable village, where they could keep their sheep, and so on and so on. We think we found it. There is actually only one oasis in the whole area, and that really is a pretty likely contender. Okay, so here we go. Look, we're really modern now in this version of the talk. We're Google Earth, and that's you can see Nuweiba there where they crossed over. So if we ink in their route roughly, I mean, we're not 100% certain where this is on Google Images, but I'm guessing that Marah is somewhere like around there. In Exodus 15 and verse 22 to 26, then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the desert of Shur, and for 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. So they were roughly 3 days' journey in. When they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. That's why the place is called Marah. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, what are we to drink? This was a bit of a familiar refrain. There's a picture of Marah, not the best picture I could find, however, of Marah. And you'll notice that is 67 kilometers from where they landed on the Red Sea. So that's pretty much what the Bible says. 3 days' journey from the Red Sea, and they were getting thirsty, and they, I presume, didn't have much means of carrying water with them. I mean, here they are, they're going out into the wilderness. Over 1 million people, according to the biblical record, they got no water. They were running out of water. I mean, they might have been hardy in those days, but you can imagine, you get the feel of it. This is, you can understand. You think, well, what a moany old lot the children of Israel were, but actually, you can understand it. They then went on to Elim. I'm not going to stop long on that one. And that's in verse 27 of the same chapter. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and they camped there near the water. So, they did actually throw the wood in the Marah and make the streams, the water less bitter so they could drink it. But it looked like that was not planned to be a long-term place for them. They had to move on. They moved on down the road, and Elim, that is pretty much, that's where Google Earth identifies Elim. That's the great thing. Some of these places now are beginning to be identified on the maps because of the numbers of people that are going there. Quite a number of people are visiting these sort of places, and many of them are writing books about it. It's very interesting. Many of them, it's having a profound effect on them as they're discovering these things and getting a sense of the reality and the power of God, even over all these years. There is Elim, 70 palms and 12 springs, the Bible says, and there are still 12 springs at Elim. How amazing is that? I think some of them have got kind of concrete sort of things around them, so they don't quite have the same romantic image, but they are still there. Still, I mean, I find that incredible. They would still be there. I don't know whether anybody's counted the palm trees, but it could be 70, couldn't it? It wouldn't surprise me if there were not something like that. Certainly in Moses' time, they actually did count the palm trees. There's another view of it. And Jim and Penny, who were there, when they first saw this, they were totally amazed because it's a very dry desert. And these are the only palm trees that they'd seen anywhere. Even in the oasis that we think is Jethro's oasis, there were no palm trees. So this is a really quite unusual feature that is still there today. And you can see the wide avenue. It's like a main trunk road going through the wilderness that you could take a group of people that big on. There's another view of it from the hill. I kind of gathered all the pictures that I could. I thought I'll give you the whole lot. And there it is in the middle of their way, and the springs where they could find water. Okay, from Elim, they then went to Rephidim. Now, Rephidim is roughly up there in chapter 17 and verse 1. The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. So they were meandering a little bit, and I've tried to follow them through the valleys as far as you could follow the topography. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. This is getting very familiar, isn't it? Everywhere they went. Obviously, that is the major issue. They got animals and cattle and so on with them, but what they didn't have was water for them all. And so there's Rephidim, and you'll see I've put a mark there for Mount Sinai, right there on the right-hand edge. That is where they were ultimately headed to. So you can see how they're kind of a bit meandering, but they're pretty much en route. And they went to Rephidim, which is the backside of Mount Sinai. I found that map was quite a helpful one. I don't know where I got it from, dug it up somewhere. And that shows roughly the area of Rephidim. You'll see that Mount Sinai is a bit like a crescent, facing east. And if a mountain's got a front side and a back side, then you'd have to say that the back side is where they went to. Rephidim is the back side of Sinai. And they were eventually due to go on round to the front of Sinai, which is quite an amphitheatre, quite a big space where you could get that kind of number of people to gather in front of it. That's Rephidim, where they camped without any water, and of course we know what happened there. So they quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." And Moses replied, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses, and they said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and our livestock die of thirst?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." And the Lord answered Moses, "Walk on ahead of the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile. And go, and I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb." So there is a rock at Horeb that he was to strike, and strike the rock, says God, and water will come out of it for the people to drink. So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. And then he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" Yeah, I mean, you realize how fickle human beings are. You know, things have only got to get a little bit down and we start to question and, you know, where's God? You know, why is God not doing something? So God said, "Go to the rock and strike it." Well, now, there is the rock. See that? Can you see that? That little nib on that complex of rocks there, pretty certain that is the rock. When you look at it closer up, it's a significant monolith. It's reckoned it's probably about the size of a 6-story block of flats. I mean, where did it come from? No idea. Did God leave it there? I guess he did. I mean, the Lord must know the earth very intimately, mustn't he? And what is happening and what's going on and so on. There it is again, and you can see that the rock is split right down the middle. I mean, this is a rock that is absolutely huge. And Moses had to tap it with a stick, and it split. I mean, that must have made those people jump out of their skin. What kind of a crack must that have been to split a rock of that size? What's also interesting is if you look at the foreground of the picture, all the rocks in the picture are all rounded and smoothed over because water has been flowing over them. And if you look at the rock again, and particularly I think at that picture, you can see the erosive effect of the water as it's come out of that. See, it's made a V shape there in the rock as it's flowed out from there. So this was not a little tap. I mean, this was a considerable quantity of water came out of that rock and pooled all around there. I mean, really massive quantity. There's an artist's impression of what he thinks it might have looked like, and there's a human being by the side of it to give you a sense of the scale. So this was the rock at Horeb. Now, when I came across this, I thought, this is amazing. You know, when I read it, when you just read, go to the rock of Horeb, you think, oh, it's the rock of Horeb. You know, you hit a bit of a rock and it came out like a bit of a tap. I don't think so. How long it came out for, we don't know, but I think for a considerable time, certainly for them to water their cattle and everything else. There are also remains of encampments here to indicate that they were here for quite a long time. Those circular patterns of stones almost certainly were used to hold down their tents, their fabric that they sheltered under and so on. And there's quite a lot of those around. I mean, obviously they're a bit higgledy-piggledy now, but you'd expect that after 3,500 years. This was also the place where they had a conflict with the Amalekites. Moving on in chapter 17, the Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. And Moses said to Joshua, "Choose some of our men and go out and fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands." So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered, and Moses and Aaron and Hur went to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hand, people use this for sermons. You know, if you've got your hands upraised to God, you've got power. Well, this is where it happened. This is where it happened for the first time. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and they put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur held his hands up one on one side and one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword, while Moses prayed him through the whole thing. And then the Lord said to Moses, write this on a scroll as something to be remembered, and make sure that Joshua hears it, because I will completely blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. So there were people that were specifically chosen to receive judgment from God, probably because of their vindictive and spiteful and evil attacks upon his people. Moses built an altar and he called it, "The Lord is my banner." You remember that chorus, "His banner over me is love"? Well, it's come from this. And for he said, "Hands were lifted up to the throne of the Lord, and the Lord will be at war against the Amalekites from generation to generation." And down the back of that stone, there are, believe it or not, there are the remnants of an altar. Do you see it pictured there? You see the stone on the horizon there? That's the rock of Horeb. So it's just round the back of that. They found the thing. Is it the original one? I think it certainly could be. The thing is, this is the empty quarter in Saudi. There's nothing here. You know, a few Bedouin, but they're not interested in rocks. So they're just, by and large, things have just been left there where they lay. So it couldn't be a better place, really, for God to record events that took place so long. There's the rock of Horeb. Okay, and where did Jethro live? Well, there's a sort of a heat map of the area, and you can see the hot signs of heat and vegetation. At least it's probably not a heat map, that's probably a vegetation map. That's a vegetation map. Now that's where the oasis was in Midian. And verses 5, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, together with Moses' sons and wife, came to him in the desert. So they came visiting while he was there in Rephidim, where he was camped near the mountain of God. And Jethro had sent word to him, "I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and your 2 sons." So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, and he bowed down and kissed him. And they greeted each other and then went into the tent. Funny, really. I mean, it sounds like Moses ignores his wife and kisses his father-in-law. It's a bit weird, isn't it? But there you go. I'm sure he didn't. And Moses told his father-in-law about, there's obviously a spiritual relationship there with his father-in-law. I mean, the Midianites are related into Abraham, of course, through previous generations. So they're not completely godless. And Moses told his father-in-law about everything the Lord had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for Israel's sake, about all the hardships they'd met along the way and how the Lord had saved them. And Jethro was delighted, and so on and so on. So that's what is thought. The actual modern name for this thing is Al-Bad, but the locals call it Jethro as its old name. And that's interesting, isn't it? That it's still there after all this time. There it is, as you see, it's there on the Google Maps. Jebel El Lawz, that's the Mount Sinai I'm going to propose to you in a moment or two. And Rephidim was sort of up there around the back of it. So Jethro came to there to meet with Moses and so on. There are some structures there. Those are called the Caves of Jethro. And they are to the south of the oasis of Al-Bad. It's amazing, isn't it? You come into a desert, you think there's nothing there at all. And then these guys have found all sorts of remnants and things that are reminiscent of it. Okay, so Mount Sinai now. That's getting there. So they got there now. Now we're going to finish. There are a few sub-points on my last point, but we're going to finish now with the signs that there are around Mount Sinai of the fact that the children of Israel were once there. In Exodus 19, verse 1 and 2, in the 3rd month after the Israelites left Egypt, on the very day they came to the desert of Sinai. And after they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. So they've been around the back of the mountain for quite a while. Don't know why they were hanging around. They've now gone around to the front of the mountain. You remember that crescent-shaped mountain on the other side. So we're going to look at some of the things that they found. Number one, they found a burnt mountain. They found a mountain that has been seared with heat, and it still shows after 3.5 years. That was very hot. Secondly, we're going to look at the Holy Precinct, where Moses met with the elders as they went up and met with God at the foot of the mountain. Thirdly, we're going to look at the 12 pillars. Moses built pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel, and it could well be they're still there, strewn about, but still there. Fourthly, we're going to look at the cave of Elijah. Elijah, you remember, fled to Mount Sinai at a particularly low point in his life and ministry, and God met with him with, you remember, a still small voice that spoke into his ear. We think we found the cave where Elijah went to. Fifthly, we're going to look at the main altar. There was an altar, must have had a significant altar for 1 million and more people to make sacrifices to the Lord at the foot of the mountain there. The remains of it are still there. Sixthly, we're going to look at the watering system. How did they drink there? You know, they got the rock of Horeb, but that's around the back of the mountain. How did they get drink in the front of the mountain? Well, there is evidence. There is actually still evidence of vegetation and the sort of the cleft down the front of the mountain. But there is also evidence in the past of considerable water works that were there. And then seventhly, we're going to look at the altar of the golden calf. Okay, have you got all that? Is anybody hot? If you're watching this online, we're hot. Are we hot? It is a baking night tonight, so I hope you're comfortable if you're watching us online, but we're all sitting there sweltering, so great stuff. Okay, so there's the burnt mountain. You'll see it for Jebel El-Lawz is the modern name, which it means the mountain of the almonds. There's an almond tree right on the top of it. There's another story about that. But you'll notice that even in bright sunlight, from this distance, you can see that the mountain is slightly darker. Can you see that? That is the Saudi guard post that is surrounding it. They put a fence all around it because it's a historic monument. It may also be to stop people visiting it. Although now I do gather that you can do a tourist trip to Mount Sinai in Midian, which is really interesting. That's a sign of the changes that have come during the last few years. But certainly at that time you couldn't get near it. There was a fence barring it because it was supposed to be an archaeological site and nobody was supposed to go in it. There's the mountain from a bit closer up. And again, you can see that the darkened nature of the mountain, and that's a reflection of what happened in chapter 19 and verse 16. On the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning with a thick cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. That would have been really loud. Everyone in the camp trembled, and then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God. And they stood at the foot of the mountain, and Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. And smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace. So the fire was not a volcano coming up, it was smoke coming down. The whole mountain trembled violently. I mean, can you imagine that? You know, this is not for people of a sensitive disposition, honestly. And the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder. And then Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. And the Lord descended to the top of Mount Sinai, and he called Moses to the top of the mountain. So Moses went up. I mean, Moses, I probably should have said this before, Moses is a heroic figure. I always used to think Charlton Heston was a really good Moses, and thought I'll be a bit disappointed when I read the real one because he won't be as good as Charlton Heston, but I suspect he will. Yeah, he was a prince of Egypt. He was a man of action. He was a battle leader. You know, when he went to Midian, he cleared off all these shepherds that were attacking the women, single-handedly. So he was a sheer. So the Lord said to him. So Moses went up. I mean, he's not afraid. And the Lord said to him, "Go down and warn the people so they do not force their way through to see the Lord, and many of them perish." I don't think that warning with due respect to the Lord, would have been really necessary. I don't think anybody was wanting to force their way through to get to the Lord. I think they were all quaking in their boots. Even the priests who approach the Lord must consecrate themselves, or the Lord will break out against them. So you get a definite sense of a God that is a mighty God, God that is holy, God that came down and burned the mountain. People that have been there, numbers of people that have been there, have said that the top of the mountain it's just like, it's all the rocks are there. It's just like everywhere else, with loose rocks and bits there, but they all turn black. It's like they've been seared and burnt, like obsidian, like coal. You can't comprehend it, can you? The amazing impact. There's a view of it from above. And you can see that even from that light, you can see the definite darker colour of the mountain compared with all the other mountains in the area. That's the burn pattern, a sketch of it. And they've worked out that with that kind of pattern, that the heat source was probably about 50 feet above the mountain when it seared. I mean, that's, well, I mean, you might not be that much interested in that kind of thing. I'm a bit of a geek, so I find that rather interesting. You'll see there again that the curved shape of the mountain. You can see the split rock, Rephidim, at the back. You see that on the left-hand side. You can see Al-Bad down there, Jethro's home. So there's a number of things that are heightened for that. You see the Holy Precinct, we're going to look at that, and the golden calf altar. So all of those we will look at. The Holy Precinct, Nick, there's another view of it, and there is the Holy Precinct, I believe. In Exodus 24, we're told what happened here. I won't read all the verses here. And then he said to Moses, this God said to Moses, come up to the Lord, you and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and 70 of the elders of Israel. You are to worship at a distance. But Moses alone is to approach the Lord. The others must not come near. So God is constantly warning them not to come near. I mean, amazing really that in Jesus now we can come near. But then they couldn't. And the people may not come up with him. And when Moses went and told the people all the Lord's words and laws, they responded with one voice, everything the Lord has said, we will do. And then verse 9, Moses and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and the 70 elders of Israel went up, and they saw the God of Israel. Under his feet was something like a pavement made of sapphire, clear as the sky itself. But God did not raise his hand against these leaders of the Israelites. They saw God and they ate and drank. So it's like God came down to meet with them. And the whole ground was seared smooth, like a pavement made of sapphire. And it's believed that where you see where I'm pointed, that's the remain of it there. You can see that smooth platform at the bottom there of the mountain, the place where God met with Moses and the elders. I suspect that's the way that Moses went when he went up to be with the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain and stay here, and I will give you the tablets of stone with the law and the commands I've written for their instruction. So I suspect he probably went up that ridge. I'm not absolutely 100% sure on that, but it's very interesting because when you come up that ridge, you find some interesting things, as we shall see in a minute. The 12 pillars were down the bottom of the mountain, and in Exodus 24 verse 4, we've just jumped over this, Moses then wrote everything down that the Lord had said, and he got up early the next morning and he built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and he set up 12 stone pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Are they them? Well, it's believed by those that have been there that they are. They show signs of not just being random rocks, they're actually there, held in position, as it were, in a row, in a pattern. Looking from the top of the mountain down to the bottom, there are the pillars, and oh, that's it. I thought, and that arrow is pointing to the altar. We'll come on to that in a moment. That's the thing that I wanted to point out next. The route that they would have taken up the mountain took you past what is actually a cave. There is the cave. It's not on the main seared part of Mount Sinai, it's on the bit before that. there is a story of it in this book. This is another couple of people that went wandering in. Howard Bloom, I think he was a New York Times journalist, wrote this book from the story of Larry Williams and Bob Cornuke. Larry Williams was a sort of a millionaire guy that had heard that they discovered the real Mount Sinai, and he believed that there would be gold there, because the Bible talks about the Egyptians, the Israelites coming out of Egypt with a load of gold, with all the gold from the Egyptians and so on and so on. He believed that it would still be there and he could find it. And so this is the story of him. I mean, he's not a Christian. He's just after the money. Bob Cornuke was a kind of an action man, a sort of he was going there as his protection in order to, in a strange situation. The interesting story of these two men is that Larry Williams completely came back from this, completely changed, got rid of his millionaire lifestyle and went to a simpler lifestyle. I'm not sure he became a Christian. Bob Cornuke actually became a Christian, and I've heard him speaking at conferences. You can probably find him on YouTube actually, telling the story of Mount Sinai. He's got one or two other things that I think he's probably wrong on, but that doesn't matter. It changed his life. And that's the story again and again for these people. So powerful was this that it changed their lives. And Bob Cornuke tells of how the night they were on Mount Sinai, I mean, obviously it was very cloak and dagger. They had to hide from the Saudis. It was at night. They went up the thing and they decided to hide in this cave. He went in the cave and he was so frightened, he came right out of it and didn't stay there. I mean, how interesting is that? And that indelibly etched itself. The sense of the holiness of God seemed to dwell. I've never been a great one for holy places, but there are some places that genuinely are holy because God was there, and God left Moses looking completely white and his hair all turned white. So if God can do that to a person, what can he do to a place that he's been in? Anyway, certainly this was the place. And of course you'll remember that this was where Elijah fled from Jezebel a lot later on, and he went. So in 1 Kings 19 verse 8, he says he got up and he ate and he drank, and strengthened by that food he travelled for 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. Why did he go there? I don't know why he went there, but he knew where it was. Then he went into a cave and spent the night, and the word of the Lord came to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he replied, "I've been very zealous," and he has a bit of a moan time now. "I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars, put your prophets to death with the sword, and I'm the only one left. And now they're trying to kill me too." And the Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." That's probably where he was. Probably. Can't be 100% certain, but certainly when you put all these things together, it is the only cave that is there on the mountain of Horeb. Okay, we're getting nearly to the end now. This is a view again from the mountain. This is not my picture. This was a picture that was given with the markings on it, but you get a fairly good idea of the different features. You'll see down the bottom there is kind of D. Can you see that? That's down there. There's a sort of a square shape, or a kind of a right angular shape. That is the main altar. The 12 pillars we've already mentioned. They were down. They're down there in C. That's the 12 pillars. That's the Saudi guard post there, but you can't see that because it's off picture. B there. Is the altar of the golden calf. I'm a bit out of order there. That's across the way. And you can see the big area for habitation for many, many, many people, million people in that whole area there, as it were, looking up at a mountain that is burnt and singed, where God has met with the people. Down the bottom here, there are the signs that at some point this was a whole water system at the bottom of the mountain. Again, the Bible doesn't say a whole lot about that, but certainly they would have had to have had water at Mount Sinai for however long they were there. There's a diagram of the altar. You can see I've outlined it there. So it's pretty much a right angle. I don't know what I would have thought the altar would have been, but that looks like it. That's a diagrammed view of it. It's a kind of it, you can see, it's a one-way system. So you go in one way, you offer your sacrifice at the end there on that bit of dirt and rocks, and then you come out the other way. I mean, you've got to have some sort of system to offer sacrifices for 1 million people. And that looks like it was it. And these are other pictures of it that are still there. I mean, amazing. They're not fashioned rock. God said to them, do not make it of rocks that you've shaped with implements. There's another picture of the main altar there in really quite favourable light so that you can get a sense of it. And there it is at the bottom with the arrow pointing to it. The water in the wells, you can see there's a whole area there that once would have been filled with water. There it is again. And then round the sides of it, you see all those dots around the side. They are actually filter wells. So they were double skin wells with gravel in them so that the water that came in the main pool would have soaked through these wells and they could draw their water from them and find clean water. So Moses had to do it. He was an architect. He had to do some stuff. So serving God is not just a question of being spiritual. You've got to know stuff and do it. And he was a man that was picked for it. There is an outline of one of the wells there. I mean, again, they're all filled in now, so you won't find them very well, but it's thought that they were sort of that sort of design so that there could, and there were loads of them. Obviously, a lot of people needed drink. So this must have been the place where their come-to place, where they settled down and were able to drink and feed their flocks and feed and drink them and so on. Across the way from it, you'll remember the mention of the altar of the golden calf. This comes a little bit later on when Moses has gone up into the mountain and then is delayed coming down and the people become impatient. And I won't read all of that, but these first 6 verses, when the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered round Aaron and they said, "Come, let us make gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us out from Egypt, we don't know what's happened to him." What a shower. Really, but how like human beings. And Aaron answered them, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons and your daughters are wearing and bring them to me." So all the people took off their earrings and they brought them to Aaron, and he took what they handed him and he made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf. Why did he do that? I can't believe that Aaron would have done that. Fashioning it with a tool. And then they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." What blasphemy. Then when Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." So the next day the people rose early, sacrificed burnt offerings, presented fellowship offerings, and afterwards they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. And then the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, because your people whom you brought up out of Egypt have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them and have made themselves an idol and sacrificed to it and have said, 'These are your gods, O Israel.'" That's the pile of rocks is believed was the altar that they sacrificed the golden calf on. And it's full of graffiti. You may, I don't know whether you can see that there. You probably can, but there are loads of animal shapes, calf shapes, and it's all over it. It's been declared an archaeological area and been put behind a fence, but you can get a bit of a sense of it there. There's a big picture of a golden calf there, scratched on the rock. There's a better close-up picture of it. There's another one with a worshipper holding the calf up in the air, which is exactly the same as this picture, which has come from Egypt. So they'd reverted really to Egyptian worship. It was what they knew. And then there also on the rock is scratched a menorah. That is the earliest menorah ever discovered in the world, the sign of the children of Israel. I didn't even know it went back that long. In fact, somebody since has scratched it off, so I gather. But anyway, it's there on the photo. So there you go. So there's the altar of the golden calf. There are all the other things I think that we've seen, and the water system and everything else that they had there. And there's an aerial view of the mountain, and the darkened shape of it shows up pretty well there. We're going to close by looking at Hebrews chapter 12 and verses 18 to 29. As always, it seems to me, when you look into these old things, there is always a lesson for today as well. So Hebrews chapter 12, which I'm going to get to in half a minute. And verses 18 to 29. You have not come to a mountain that can be touched, and that is burning with fire, to darkness, to gloom and storm, to a trumpet blast, or to such a voice speaking words that those who heard it begged that no further word be spoken to them, because they could not bear what was commanded. If even an animal touches the mountain, it must be stoned. So you haven't come to that, says the writer to the Hebrews. The sight was so terrifying that Moses said, I'm trembling with fear. So maybe he wasn't such a hero after all. However, to go and actually face God is really quite something. But you have come to Mount Zion, to the heavenly Jerusalem, to the city of the living God. You have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, to the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God, the judge of all men, to the spirits of righteous men made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than Abel. So you might think that the writer would go on and say, so don't worry. You haven't got to come to Mount Sinai like they did. You've come to Jesus, who is the writer of a better covenant. But then he goes on, see to it that you do not refuse him who speaks. If they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, how much less will we if we turn away from him who warns us from heaven? It's quite a sting in the tail of that passage there. You haven't had to come to Mount Sinai. You've come to a different mountain. You've come to the mountain of Zion. You've come to the Savior that has died for the whole world. But that doesn't mean that you're off the hook. You can do what you please. You still got to face him who is holy, burning fire, love and passion. At that time his voice shook the earth, but now he has promised once more, I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. The words once more indicate the removing of what can be shaken, that is created things, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. Amen. Great. Well, I wasn't sure when I got to the end, but I have actually got to the end. So that's the way up course number 6. The mountain of God, the place where Moses led the children of Israel, and that then sent them off into their journey. Next week we shall be coming to the concluding episode of the 3rd series. And we should be looking at the Ark of the Covenant, already been trailered. I mean, they made a film on Raiders of the Lost Ark. Could it be that Hollywood has followed reality yet again? Well, we shall see next week. Hope you'll be able to come along for that. Now I think we're ready for a good drink, aren't we? And a bit of breath. Don't know where you're going to go for a breath of fresh air, but we'll take a moment. If you've got any questions, do write them down on a sheet. That'd be really helpful, and I'll do my best to answer them if I possibly can. Great, thank you.